Good evening, folks. My name's Don Threot. I'm Interim Director of Community Development with the City of Greeley. Wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight. So before I kick things off, I did want to just let everyone in the room know, we're not here tonight talking about the Catalyst Project or Cascadia or the upcoming election, any of those topics. We're actually going to be zooming out quite a bit. We're talking about all of Western Greeley. We're talking about 22 square miles that encompass everything west of about 83rd Avenue. And the reason we're talking about it is that we have engaged in a community effort for all of us to come together and decide and determine how we want Greeley to grow in the future. Not any one particular development, just Greeley as a general rule, how we want to see this, how we want to see us develop west, make those determinations so that we can grow intentionally. Back in July, many of you joined us for a visioning meeting over at the Ames Center, where we talked about some of the concepts around walkable communities, around urbanism, around how we really connect neighborhoods and design them properly so all the components are in a place where they can be best utilized to make the most livable neighborhoods. We heard your ideas, we heard your concerns and your hopes for the future. We heard what you wanted to see Greeley become in the future. A lot of what we're planning tonight and what we're talking about tonight are going to be the places that your kids and your grandkids live. In a lot of cases, these things aren't going to happen next week. They're going to happen quite a ways down the road. So since July, our planning team and consultants have been hard at work taking all of your feedback and building it into concepts to draft a regional plan and a form-based code to really implement how we all decided we want. We still have plenty of opportunity for feedback. I wanted to let you know tonight I'm joined by our consultants, Jason and Pamela with Able City, and then Jeff and Genevieve with Speck Dempsey. And I did want to, before we get any further, welcome some of our officials here. We have Mayor Dale Hall is out in the audience hiding somewhere. We have Councilmember Deb DeBooty. Thank you guys for coming tonight. We have several city staff sprinkled throughout the audience, and we really wanted to make sure that that we had several people throughout the crowd to make sure we could listen and get ideas as we go. So with that, really we're looking at a community effort for all of us to come together. We want to make sure that we try to implement what we have overwhelmingly heard in all of those surveys that you guys receive, in all of our direction from the City Council strategic plan to create more walkable communities. If we want to do something different, if we want to have something different, we have to do something different. And if we just plan our homes here with our shopping over here and our jobs way down here, that doesn't really make for a very livable city. And so we decided we need to enlist some help. And what we have is Jeff Speck is a national, international expert in building walkable cities with a 30-year career. He's the author of the book, Walkable Cities. And he and Jason and the entire team have been working hard to take your input and bring this plan together. So I'd like to introduce Jeff and bring him up to talk a little bit more about what we've found.
Thank you, Don. Nice crowd. Thank you for coming out. The challenge that we faced with the west side of Greeley was this question: how do you make a regional plan? Which isn't a question we've asked ourselves all that often. Don mentioned I've been doing this work for about 30 years, and we've done a lot of new town plans. I'm going to show you one of them in Bradburn, called Bradburn, that's in Westminster. We've done a lot of downtown plans, a lot of Main Street plans, a lot of street plans. In those 30 years, I've probably only worked on like 3 regional plans because it's just not done very often. Not many cities, frankly, are growing all that quickly, and among those that are growing, not many of them are planning all that much. It's an actual real problem because if you grow without a plan, you don't grow in a healthy way. The leadership here in Greeley had the foresight and the kind of self-awareness to say, hey, since we are growing, let's have a plan in place for what shape that growth should take. And so when this job came to us, I looked at one of the few books that actually talks about how to do a regional plan, which I did co-write many years ago with my mentor, Andres Duani, called the Smart Growth Manual. And it has a whole chapter called How to Do a Regional Plan. And what I was reminded of looking at this chapter was that there's kind of three main things that a regional plan has to do to be successful. And before I go on, let me ask, who here came to one of the earlier public sessions that I presented at, or we presented at? Okay, so actually only about a quarter of you. So those of you who've been here before will forgive me for, I'm showing some of the same slides. And it's funny because, we're going to be showing these to City Council or Planning Commission or both tomorrow. And so we had to submit them weeks ago. So actually I had to remind myself what I'd put in the show. The other thing is that I think I have 2 minutes to present these slides tomorrow. I have about 60 slides. But tonight I'm not going to rush, so I can warm up for that quick version tomorrow. But tonight I can take a little more time to talk about the reasoning behind this work. And I mentioned 3 things that go into a good regional plan. The first one is mapping the land that you want to always preserve, right? I'll just say now so there's no suspense. The second one is to map the key corridors, which in the case of a place like West Greeley are principally your transportation corridors and your streets, for reasons I'll explain. And then the third component is to introduce neighborhood structure, to move forward with a commitment to grow in the form of neighborhoods. And I'll talk about what that means. But my brief remarks tonight will be very briefly about the green print, secondarily about the corridors, and then finally about how you build neighborhoods, which is the way we used to build, of course, and don't build as much anymore. The Rural Preserve is very straightforward. It was mostly handed to us with the West Greeley Regional Plan green print. It is a very strong proposal and a strong document and pretty well established. And the key to a green print is you commit to preserving your natural areas, the ones that you've decided as a community that you do not want to see developed. And so the first step of the plan, it's a very simple one, is to draw a line around these areas and say, okay, we're not going there. And I could say we didn't get any pushback there, and it was pretty clear the direction we received, importing that into the regional plan. The second issue, where we'll spend a little more time, is mapping corridors. In bigger cities or more dense cities, those are transit corridors, or they could be natural corridors, or a river or some other feature that is obviously going to be the backbone of your plan. In the case of Greeley, your principal corridors, aside from those contained within the green print, those natural passages, are your road network. And the big challenge here, and we experienced it coming out here tonight, and you experience it every day, the big challenge here is that you can be quite low density, but have choking traffic because you just have very few streets that actually connect. And one of the big challenges of conventional, what we call sprawl, American development, is that there's this, what's called a sparse hierarchy of streets. The street network is highways connecting to arterials, connecting to collectors, and then the local roads in between, but generally only the arterials and the collectors actually connect anywhere. So the actual traffic that's getting you east and west and north and south, the streets that are getting you east and west and north and south are very few, and then all the traffic is concentrated on those very few streets, and they choke on traffic very quickly. So one of the key things to the plan was to identify other places where more connections were possible. And so this is pretty much your existing connective street network in West Greeley, and this is our proposed connective street network. It takes existing streets within development that already is there. It takes the new sites which are expected to be developed, and again, over the next decades, right? This isn't happening tomorrow. This is happening over decades. But again, if we don't have this, it's a funny thing about planning. If you don't plan way into the future, then you can't plan for the future. But if you plan way into the future, you show people things that scare them because they're showing massive change. But this is the massive change that will happen over decades and decades. So that's what you need, what it's important to understand, to not be freaked out when you see something like this, is that if the future growth is going to be healthy, then it needs to follow the healthy pattern of having, for example, many connections. And so what we're showing here from the existing network to the proposed network is everything else you're going to see in the plan preserves these other connections or asks for them as empty sites or sites slated for redevelopment within our boundary are redeveloped. And that's going to be so important to taking traffic off of just 34 and just business 34 as you go east and west. And that also means, well, I'm showing you another page from the Smart Growth Manual. One of the key items in a separate chapter that isn't the regional planning chapter basically says when you plan a new neighborhood, plan it with opportunities to connect to the next neighborhood. And what you often see here is when a piece of farmland is developed and the property ends, you just have houses all along that edge with no missing lots that could become streets so that that development could connect to a future development which isn't yet understood. Whenever we do a new town, and we do a lot of new town design, I'm going to show you one, we always have opportunities, we remove house lots so that we can always have more than that one highway or arterial or collector connection to the next development. So that's super important. Then the third thing I mentioned was the concept of the neighborhood, which is, okay, we've preserved the natural areas we want to save. We have created a more robust vehicular network, because here it's, you're not taking trains. We have a robust vehicular network that is allowing multiple connections and not clogging traffic on very few streets. But then how do we develop these sites? And these sites that are slated for development, many of them are about the size of the neighborhood you see here. The typical neighborhood you find historically is a half mile across. It's a Jeffersonian quarter section. When Jefferson divided the square miles of America, each into 4 pieces, it's 160 acres. This was established in the early 20th century as the proper scale for a neighborhood. And many of your sites are one of these. Future sites where development is expected to occur, many of them are one of them. Some of them are several of them. You're going to see some of them are 3 or 4 in size. Some of them are close to a square mile in size. But you want to grow them along the increment of the neighborhood. And the neighborhood means compact, diverse, and walkable. That's the planner's definition of a neighborhood. It's compact in the ways I just described. It's just not so big. It's diverse in that it has many of your daily needs within it. So you're capturing trips that would otherwise be on the road. The trip to school, fantastic if you can do it. Trip to get cat food, certainly. The trip to the soccer field or to the playground, absolutely. A lot of trips that would otherwise be putting you on the road, if you're in a proper neighborhood, they're in your neighborhood. And so you don't have to get on the collector road. So that's the diversity of the neighborhood. And then finally, they're walkable in the sense that we design them with nice narrow streets, slow speeds, and other features, great sidewalks and trees that make people want to walk in them. So here's the 2 models of conventional suburban development on the left, where you have that collector road with each use on it, right? The park is one driveway, the office is another, retail in red, institutional in blue, housing in orange. Each of these uses is just another address. And what's missing from this drawing, we should change it. What's missing is the cul-de-sacs of a single-family subdivision, which is, of course, what you find mostly in this model. But on the right is a traditional neighborhood it's the same stuff. It's places to live, work, shop, recreate, get educated. But how big is it and how far apart is each one from the other? They're quite close together. And also, is it located in a nice street network? So there's lots of different paths from anywhere to anywhere else, so no one street needs to be very big. And that's what makes a neighborhood on the right very different from conventional development on the left. So we've been spending, my colleagues before me and I have been spending almost 50 years talking about the difference between these 2 forms of development, towns and sprawl. The traditional neighborhood, this is Newburyport, Massachusetts, it's near where I live. Traditional neighborhood, diverse, compact, walkable, and then the suburban sprawl, which is typically a single use over a very large area. And you'll notice that most of the streets are loops and cul-de-sacs. And so very few streets connect, and those only streets that do connect, therefore, become huge, because they have to handle all the traffic of the entire city. And you can see that, in fact, there's not a single address on those big streets. The houses turn their backs to them, they have walls, because they're noxious. They're not something you would ever walk on. So that's the model. That it's easy to break it down into its parts, because each one just takes its own chunk of land. So the place, the housing subdivision where you only live, the office park where you only work, the shopping mall where you only shop. Schools get bigger and bigger, and their parking lots get bigger and bigger. And then even playing fields are consolidated so that the kid who lives across that canal actually has a 1.5-mile drive to get to the playing field that his house is looking at. That's that model. And when I was here last, someone said, and I repeated it without getting in too much trouble, they said, "We don't want to become Aurora." That's what we kept hearing. So we don't want to be Aurora. But in fact, the model that grew Aurora, right, that's kind of cooked it, right, it's done, of these single-use pods that you see, right, it's very few streets that connect. It's big streets when they are streets, and then it's each of these different types of roof represents a cluster of one type of use. That's the model that almost everyone does everywhere. So as West Greeley has grown, it is growing according to the same model. So if you're going to keep growing, which is an if, but if you're going to keep growing, and if you want to have a different destiny than Aurora, you need to have a different model than Aurora. And that's the purpose of the plan that we're creating. So of course, Greeley has a wonderful example of the other model, and you remember the two diagrams of the sprawl and the town. When you look closer to not only the downtown, but you look closer to the heart of Greeley, and you find this more traditional model of small blocks and mix of uses and walkability and lots of streets. And of course, that's how most American cities grew if they've had the good fortune to be around for more than 100 years, which you have. And you've got this great little downtown. It's full of great buildings, some of which survive and some which don't, but a wonderful inheritance that you can learn from. And then the model being intact for us to also learn from. So I showed last time, and we toured it. And then today, Councilmember Deb and about a dozen of you also joined us on site at this town that I worked on many years ago called Bradburn Village. Who's been to Bradburn Village? That's good, almost no, okay, well, about 6 of you. Bradburn Village, when you drive by on the highway, on 120th Street in Westminster, you wouldn't even really notice it. Today I called it an ice cube in hell. Not that Westminster is hell, a lot of people enjoy living in Westminster, but if you prefer walkable neighborhoods to car-dependent suburban sprawl, then you don't like that area, because basically almost the entirety of Westminster, like Aurora, is single-use pods collected on high-speed streets. In Bradburn, you turn off 120th, which is the high-speed street to the north, onto a main street. And the main street is a shop. I'm going to show you pictures of each of these streets, but it's at the top of the slide in the middle. There's a main street. And what it has is a couple blocks of shops, and shops with offices above them. And then to the east, in the upper right of the slide, you have what's effectively a giant apartment complex, but it's integrated into, it's not a pod, it's integrated into a network of streets and blocks. To the west, up top, again with the gray roofs, you have more shopping. You have a Whole Foods. Right in there, you've got a church. And to the east, on the white piece of the very edge to the east, because it's actually on the edge of this drawing, we didn't know what the plan was going to be, so it's not in this drawing, is the school that we always wanted. So a very large school is also within the neighborhood. And then what you see in yellow are houses of all different types. So here's what it looks like from the air. It's almost complete. We planned it in the 2000s. I managed the project. And it's got the main street that I told you about, pretty conventional shops. It's got a big apartment complex, but the apartment complex looks like this. It lines the streets with apartments that look like row houses. It's actually got row house streets with real row houses that line the streets like this. It's got bungalows, many of which are on streets, but some of which are on these pedestrian streets that are very popular. and it's got mansions. It also has a collection of public spaces. So it has this main central green that you see here in the center of this image, which is a popular spot after work. It's got the school that I mentioned, terminating the view as you look to the east. It's got the church, a church, as you look to the north. It's got a recreational center here. We locate all the civic buildings on civic spaces and at the ends of views so that you have that sense of orientation in the neighborhood, just like in the old days when they would point the street at the church or put the church where the street pointed. It has a community pool. It basically has all those elements of a neighborhood that you see in the image to the right. And what's remarkable about Bradburn is that it was mostly production builders doing mostly the same stuff that they do elsewhere, but according to a good code. Jason's going to talk to you about the form-based code that's been part of this project, basically the equivalent of a land use code or a subdivision ordinance, which gives some specificity to the quality of the way that we're building the different land uses and buildings in the plan. He's going to talk more about that. Westminster Bradburn had a pretty strong code, but most importantly, it was able to collect all these fairly conventional things. Commercial, including one-story commercial, offices, apartments, row houses, bungalows, houses, mansions, all of which land in the sprawl landscape, each in their own pod, but it was able to collect them all together in one place. And it wasn't that hard. Someone just had to want to do it. And Westminster wanted to do it. The developers asked the whole Front Range area, who wants this? Westminster stepped up and said, we do. The other thing it has that I didn't dwell on is that it has skinny streets, right? These are streets that you won't find in many. Find another example. These are streets that you won't find in many. They're 5 to 10 feet narrower than the conventions that you find in most cities on the Front Range. And so it's very safe and comfortable to walk around. But the developer went to a bunch of different communities in the Front Range and said, who wants this? And Westminster stepped up and said, we're willing to change our standards. Just like Greeley has said, we're willing to change our standards to make more walkable, livable neighborhoods. So I wanted to show that in this concept of it's the same stuff, but it's all collected together, and then it's collected together in a framework that makes it walkable, which means the skinny streets I mentioned. It means pulling the apartments up to the sidewalk and not having them behind a parking lot. It means pulling the retail up to the sidewalk and not having it behind a parking lot. So what I'm going to show you here are the same things, but just in different contexts. So in Westminster, this is typical, or Aurora, this is typical retail. This is the retail in Bradburn. In Aurora, this is typical office. Well, guess what? Upstairs here is typical office in Bradburn. In Aurora, this is typical apartments, where this is the public realm. The only public realm is this parking lot, which you're not going to spend a second in. In Bradburn, these are the same, types of builders doing apartments, but on a street. In Broomfield, these are row houses. And because there's no rear lane, no rear alley, the whole front of the house is the garage. In Bradburn, these are the townhouses. In Westminster, these are bungalows, mostly garage door. In Bradburn, these are the bungalows, because the rear alley allows you to put the parking in the back and have a very friendly front. This is a mansion in Westminster. These are mansions in Bradburn. Part of the neighborhood, not isolated just with other mansions, integrated, different people, different incomes, different stages of life, your kids, your grandparents, all living in the same place, which is unheard of in the typical way that things develop. So that's the neighborhood model. That's the third key component. And that's the backbone of the plan. Preserving your natural areas, connecting your corridors, and then building in the increments of neighborhoods, which is possible with good planning and good coding. And to talk about both of those things is Jason King with Able City, our partners on this project, so I'll hand it over to him.
What will happen tomorrow morning is the draft plan and the draft form-based code go online. You can find it on the city's website, or you could go to speakupgreeley.com. which is also an interactive website. So it allows us to give input and for you to send comments to the team. Because as Don pointed out, these are still draft pieces of policy and code. So two things, the plan and the code, and that's what I'm going to talk about. Also, what's going to happen is the room's going to get a little bit louder as the most important images and diagrams and matrices from the plan and the code are going to be put up on these easels while I talk. And that's going to allow us to have a conversation after this presentation around those easels and talking about the specific parts of the plan and the code. So what I'd like to do is to point out some of the most important things. When you download these things and you go to redline them or to create a comment or to write your editorial, I want to show you some of the most important pieces of them. First, we're on the west side of Greeley, as you all know. It's 22 square miles. It's only 5 miles from the downtown. It's not its own world. It's just an extension of Greeley. It's an area with neighborhoods and industrial areas, agricultural land, river corridors. It's a region. It's more than just the west side. It's going to be a whole network of corridors and trails and parks and open spaces and neighborhoods. And so it's a very large area. And so accordingly, it's been a substantive process in which we've been one step at a time coming to learn about that area and talk to people, talk to stakeholders, talk to residents. So we started in May with a project kickoff. There was analysis. A lot of you joined us for the orientation and visioning workshops in July. We submitted the plan and the code to city staff, to developers, to the people that put in the infrastructure and the people that maintain the streets. We wanted to make sure that there was nothing terribly wrong with this new vision. We made those revisions so that way, it's not just an overly ambitious plan. It's a practical thing that can be implemented. And now we're at the point where we've got a plan that's pretty good, and we're presenting it to you. And as Don said, there's a formal adoption process. You're going to be sending us your comments. We're going to have conversations around the table, and then we're going to make those edits. And then starting in summer and fall of next year is the formal adoption process. So some of you met us when Jeff presented in July at the Ames Welcome Center. We had over 200 attendees, which was really impressive. And we filled the room tonight, by the way, which is pretty incredible. This is urban planning. This isn't that exciting. So just to do this is so gratifying. It just shows how committed you all are to your area. As part of that, we had a number of different exercises, working around maps, doing visual preference surveys. You were placing green and red dots, and we were having a conversation about the future. Pretty much nothing had been drawn, and we were just touring at that time, and we were learning from all of you. So the plan, we open up the plan, and we find that the goals that rose to the top: promote mixed-use development, like Jeff was talking about. Super important, protect natural lands and agricultural lands. Enhance connectivity, mitigate environmental impacts, support local economies, work with small businesses, ensure affordable housing, and I'll talk about that in a second with some detail, and improve infrastructure strategically and frugally. So just to spend a little more time on this, Jeff showed the sort of before and after of this area. So today, this is what that area looks like. And then tomorrow, in this illustrative master plan, this is a kind of vision of a possible future at about 2050, right? And so when you get a chance, take a look, try to find this plan. There it is, the illustrative master plan. What this plan shows is the green, the open spaces, the green print, right? It shows areas, especially farms, that are unlikely to develop in the planning horizon. That's the thing. If you build densely, if you build walkable mixed-use communities, then you're satisfying the need, you're satisfying the development pressure in strategic areas. It feels like everyone is moving to Greeley, but the reality is there's a population that we can accommodate, and we can still, if we do this in a smart growth pattern, we can still preserve quite a bit of farmland. And that was important to people. That's the character of the west side of Greeley. So the maps show there's a lot of areas where nothing happens. There's a lot of areas where it's farmland. Then there's the areas that are likely to develop, likely development areas. This is the areas that you've heard about in the newspapers. These are the big development projects. These are the areas that where largely these sites are already entitled. They've already gone through the adoption process. It's pretty much inevitable that development is coming to those areas. And so those areas are shown. And then there's another kind of area. These are possible first candidate sites for the new code. City staff has done an excellent job talking to landowners and private property owners and getting us in front of them. And we've been drawing what Jeff was describing. We've been drawing those specific plans for those developers. So usually the first question after a meeting like this is, are the developers on board? Are they in the room? And the answer is yes. Some of the most important sites have been drawn specifically for them in accordance with the smart growth principles Jeff talked about. My favorite part about regional planning is your ability to create large connected trail systems. Every time a development comes in, there's a line on the map and we say, this is where a trail must come through. And if you do that early enough, and it is early enough, you can create vast networks of interconnected loops and trails. There are places in Utah where you can walk for 30 miles and your foot never touches the asphalt. I love it. There's bike trails, there's horse trails. And so before anything happens out there, the lines have been drawn. Working with the Parks Department, working with the existing trails plans that you've all been working on, and then going further, finding ways to connect things. So that's really important. These trails also connect the neighborhoods. When Jeff showed that circle, that quarter-mile circle, and he said, this is the unit of measurement for creating complete, compact, connected neighborhoods. Well, we went through the whole area, and we imagined those circles for all of these different places, and the trails connect those places. Now we zoom in, so we design at the scale of the region, and then we design at the scale of the neighborhood. Design at every scale. So this looks a lot like the plan for Bradburn. You see in this plan that was done by Pam Stacy, you see a mixed residential. So it's not just 1 square mile of single-family houses next to 1 square mile of of mixed use, or rather, of apartments. There's within a walking distance, there's a mix of different units. There's greens and trails. There's schools embedded in the community. There's a main street, and then those big streets, the arterial roadways, they're more multimodal. What this looks like, when they're built, is it looks a lot like what Jeff was showing. These are local main streets, like Don was talking about. So that way the people in this community can walk to the cafe and the kids can go to the school. There's a chance your workplace is in this neighborhood. There's a fine dining restaurant and there's a wine shop, why not? Integrating workplaces into these places are pretty critical. Young tech entrepreneurs who move to Colorado are a lot less interested in the old office parks of the past. They actually want to be in convivial, exciting community centers. And we're creating places where innovation can happen. We're placing neighborhood schools instead of out, and it's 40 minutes away. The neighborhood school is there, and the kids maybe potentially could take a walk. There are places where adults can sit and talk within sight of children that are playing. And within, connected to all of this is a range of different housing types. If you build attached units like townhomes, they will be less expensive than single-family houses. So pretty much within sight of that, one could buy a townhouse at a certain price point. Or at another price point, there could be smaller homes, front porches within conversation distance to the sidewalk, streets that are public places. And as I always say, the rich people need places to live too. And so there's spots for very large houses and for estates and for ranches. That's all critical. And everybody is within walking distance of a park. When we draw those circles, we try to make sure that within a 5-minute or a 10-minute walk, There's a spot for kids to play. There's a trail connection. There's a place for someone to have a picnic. We're building at what's called transit supportive densities. So yeah, in the near future, there's not going to be trains going out to that area like there once was, but perhaps there could be a local bus system, and then a bus rapid transit system, which is like just a very nice system of buses that move directly from the downtown to this area. And then in time, who knows? If the densities are high enough, if it's 15 units to the acre, 30 units to the acre, maybe one day there is a train that goes out to a new community. And that's a lot of traffic that's not on the streets. Because we're not just drawing small little hamlets here. There's going to be huge, big boxes. There's going to be large apartment complexes. There's going to be entertainment complexes. So everything that Jeff talked about works, even when it's the Dave & Buster's or the Taco Bell. Everything works within this sort of pattern. Now, the plan is the vision, and the code is what implements that vision. And there's going to be a map that you can get a chance to take a look at. It's too detailed to talk about tonight, except to say that along a certain trend line, you were going to build an inefficient pattern. And I know my friends who live in this area, the big conversation is how the water bill is going up. And the water bill is going up for a lot of reasons. There's less water in this area, and there's more people drawing from it. But the water bill is also going up because it takes a lot more water lines in order to service houses that are spread out in that same way. And so in the strip-style commercial way of developing, we looked at the different sort of metrics. And you see the green and red, and red equals bad and green equals good. The one I'm just going to point out here is the cost to serve per unit. And that cost to serve per unit is stuff like emergency services, but it's also the water and sewer lines. So your way of going creates, in this way, it creates a long red bar because that's going to cost a lot of money to serve each individual house. If you build in a different way, you look again, that town cost to serve per unit, the red line comes down, right? By virtue of building more densely. Not everything is a regional destination. Sometimes it's a small local main street with farmland protected around it. The cost to serve per unit comes up again, but it is not anywhere near what it was for the low-density suburban sprawl. And sometimes the proper thing to do is a rural crossroads. There are some areas out there where it should stay just a farm stand and a post office and not much else. So the code and the images from the code are over in that corner show this kind of thing. They show this gradation from the sort of the downtown all the way out to the green areas. You see the people are living above the main street units, then they're in townhomes, then they're in small houses, then they're in larger houses. And this isn't an abstraction. The neighborhoods that we're drawing really, in just a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute walk, everybody could walk from the outer edge, or rather, let's say they're in the center. They could walk from the center to a park, or they could walk from the center to a spot where they could shop. The spots where they could shop are what's called T5. We asked you to take us to your favorite places in the region that looked like downtowns, and you took us and we took pictures, and then what Pam and the team did is they codified them. They turned it into a DNA by which new places get built according to those patterns. And there's variety within every neighborhood. The most choice-worthy places have all kinds of different housing types for all kinds of different people. And there's a very intentional preservation of farmland and working farms. And then there are green belts. There are areas where there's nothing. So just to finish, then we're going to go and talk around the maps. There's certain elements, the places that you love. When Jeff showed Newburyport, which place I love, or Bradburn, or I don't know, parts of San Francisco, or there's some really cool areas in Austin. There's certain elements that you find in all of these places. from Paris to the historic neighborhoods in Anchorage. There's urban infill, there's great streets, there's a mix of uses, there's a protection of natural features, there's complete neighborhoods, there's parks people get to enjoy. When there's something old that's beautiful and worth preserving, there's preservation, there's active shopping, and there's density, so that way this can pay for itself. So there are specific areas you'll see in the plans, like there's one over there, and there's a before and there's an after. Remember, the secret's out. People know how nice this area is. Development is coming. You know that. That's not the question anymore. The question is, what will be the character of that development when it arrives? That's our job. And hopefully, all the things that make places great will be just as present on the west side as in the downtown and in all these other places that you love. All right, nobody left. That's great. After 45 minutes of slides. I think the thing to do now is to adjourn around these most important images. The authors of the plan and of the code will stand next to these images and answer your questions and have that conversation. And Pam is lifting up the Post-it notes. That's right. So if you're not so excited about a conversation with one of us, like Pam said, take one of the Post-it notes. You're gonna see things that you're gonna want to react to. There are pens and there are markers. Just write things and put them on there. And then go online. Spend some more time with these documents. You'll find ways to give us input. We read and react to every single bit of information that we receive.
Yeah, and I'll put a finer point on that the plan isn't done by any means. We have a draft. The draft is shared with you. Tonight you get to see some of it, but not in the most auspicious opportunity for taking your time with it, right? So you can go online, and the city will be collecting and sharing with us all of your comments so that we can modify the draft appropriately in response to them. We prefer taking questions around the board so then everyone gets a chance to speak about the same amount. We have over an hour to talk to you at the boards, so we'd like to do that one-on-one if we may. So thank you.